Josh Green, and this is Almost Crash Course U.S. History.
So the S stands for Soria.
And today we're going to be talking about women and their fight from oppression to slightly less oppression.
Basically the last 250 years.
Mr. Green! But weren't women important and given roles in society? Only from 8 months ago. That's what you would think because landowning white men wrote the stories. That's why it's history, not herstory. Even before the institution of the United States, women were seen as inferior. Their ideas for political and social change were to be kept to themselves.
On March 22nd, 1638, a woman by the name Anne Hutchinson was banished from the Massachusetts Bay Colony for preaching heresy against the colony's leadership system.
Basically, Anne was all, "You suck," to the ministers, and they were all, "Bye AF," and then she was all, cactus emoji.
Even though suppressed, women still had a role in the founding of America.
The Daughters of Liberty, established in 1765, were just as effective as the Sons of Liberty, with their boycotts of British goods and their homemade fabrication of clothes and other textiles.
As Samuel Adams said, with the woman on our side, we can make every Tory. Along with the Daughters of Liberty came Deborah Sampson, who disguised herself as a man and enlisted in the Continental Army, and Molly Pitcher, who brought water to soldiers on the battlefield.
Even after independence was won, or rather, independence for the male population, as it was Jefferson who said that all men were created equal, women continued to push for female representation, particularly Abigail Adams, who pleaded with her husband John Adams to remember the ladies in the writing of the new Constitution. Alas, they were forgotten.
That's a shocker.
Fast forward about 60 years through a bunch of religious revivals and the establishment of free public education, and the Industrial Revolution, which drew young farm girls to work in factories. But the darn cult of domesticity was all like, psych! Feminist movements were now on the rise. The most significant of these was probably the Seneca Falls Convention in July 1448.
More than 300 people attended the first convention, where 68 women and 32 men signed the Declaration of Sentiments, which was the first formal demand made for women's voting rights. It is the duty of women in this country to secure themselves the sacred right to the elective franchise.
Basically, the women made the Declaration of Independence. They were Oh, it's time for the mission document? The rules are simple. If I guess the document correctly, then Miss Blue has to make me a sandwich. If I don't, then she still has to make me a sandwich. Because, you know, gender roles. If the first woman God made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now they is asking to do it, the men better let them. Well, it's safe to assume this isn't a man, so that only leaves the other 3 billion people in the world. So I'm going to guess Sojourner Truth's Ain't I a Woman, because boys rule and I wrote the script. Yes! I like peanut butter and jelly, okay?
Okay.
Maybe okay will be our always.
Activists such as Sojourner Truth spoke up against male supremacy as in her speech, Ain't I a Woman, on May 28th and 29th of 1851. It didn't work.
Nope. Now be a good girl and do my laundry. Next on the list of gangsta women is Susan B. Anthony.
And the B stands for bad.
Before joining the women's rights movement, she was active in temperance.
Which probably upset Samuel Adams and all the beer that has his face on it.
Correction, it was actually Paul Revere's face. Though of course she wasn't allowed to speak at the temperance rallies because she was a woman, thus sparking her devotion to women's suffrage.
On June 17, 1873, Susan Bad Anthony was tried for voting illegally, convicted, and fined $100, which she refused to ever pay.
Susan and her BFF, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, founded the National Woman Suffrage Association in May 1869 to achieve the vote through a congressional amendment.
Unfortunately, the fruits of their labor were not to be reaped until much later. But in 1893, Colorado, of course, did adopt a constitutional amendment.
It only took the world clashing together in World War I to get the women into the workforce, and this taste of equality, even though short-lived because the men wanted their jobs back after the war, men is what drove women and their picket signs to the signing of the 19th Amendment on August 26, 1920.
This granted women the right to vote. Suffragist Carrie Chapman Catt summarized the effort saying, "To get the word male in effect out of the Constitution cost women of this country 52 years of pauseless campaigning."
Also in 1921, the American Birth Control League, later becoming the Planned Parenthood Federation of America, was founded by Margaret Sanger, who happened to be the sixth of 11 children.
Do I smell change in the air?
If you're referring to the smell of pollution from factories, then yes. The US entering World War II once again called women into the factories, but this time they would not be so easily pushed out. The famous Rosie the Riveter poster inspired women, and it was this inspiration that kept their fight alive after the war.
The 1950s was a time of affluence, cookie-cutter families, suburbs, and air conditioning. And looking at you, US History EOC, the cult of domesticity was a roach not even a nuclear war could kill. Women were encouraged to return to their home and fulfill their roles as housewives.
But these surrounding women didn't pull Betty Friedman, whose book, The Feminine Mystique, was published on February 19, 1963. Friedman called bullshit on these happy housewives, sparking the contemporary feminist movement.
The 38% of women who worked in 1960 were largely limited jobs such as nurses, secretaries, and teachers. The feminist movement focused on dismantling this workplace inequality.
In 1964, adding a prohibition to gender discrimination into the Civil Rights Act was proposed by Representative Howard Smith of Virginia. He was laughed at by the other congressmen, but the law was passed with the help of Representative Martha Griffiths of Michigan.
Griffiths' National Organization for Women went on to lobby Congress for pro-equality laws and assist women seeking legal aid in workplace discrimination.
By the end of the 1970s, the women's movement fragmented, but the services they founded, such as rape crisis centers and health clinics, were integrated into the mainstream.
Today, the gains of the feminist movement are often overlooked. Women's access to equal education, their increased participation in politics and the workforce, their access to abortion and birth controls, the existence of resources to aid domestic violence and rape victims, and the legal protection of women's rights.
Women's political influence has also been growing. In 1968, Shirley Chisholm became the first black woman elected to the House. We're also representing two minorities.
In 1981, Sandra Day O'Connor was elected as the first woman on the Supreme Court.
In 2009, Sonia Sotomayor became the third female and the first Hispanic elected to the Supreme Court Justice. And maybe in 2016, America will have its first female president.
The fight for equality was long, and still isn't completely over.
But in the words of the Queen, who run the world?
Girls.
Thanks for watching. See you next year in AP Gov.
Girls run this mother.